Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Got Harem with Hinata no Anko and Yui Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part and now start the fanfic. Rounded the alley and tried to pick the pace up. I felt blood running down my head. I felt the bruises on my sides and my arms I got before I got away. I heard the yelling of the villagers getting a little farther away as I turned again and stopped seeing a wall with a half-broken ladder. I looked around, trying to find something or somewhere to hide. Kid, you're light enough to get up the ladder. I didn't care where the voice came from as I ran over to the broken ladder. I started it as the villagers came around the corner. Get down here. The ladder got jerked around, and I held tight to the side of the ladder before I heard the metal snap. I looked back down and saw the ladder had broken. It fell back into the crowd, and I sighed before I started up again. Kid, you got real lucky. I sighed and then started to walk along the rooftop. Why is it always like this on my birthday? I stopped at the roof's edge and looked over, seeing that the ground was too far and I couldn't reach the other roof. Hey, kid, why were they chasing you? I looked back and stopped seeing a man sitting in the shadow of another building. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could tell he was looking right at me. I don't know. They do this on my birthday every year. He hummed as he looked at me. Then, he lifted his arm, and he had a bottle in his hand. He took a long drink from the bottle and sighed before he threw it over the side of the building. I heard it break and a man scream. What is your name, kid? Naruto Uzumaki. He shot up, and I saw he was huge. He was bigger than anyone I'd ever seen. You're Naruto Uzumaki. I jumped, scared, as I looked up at him. Why yeah. He walked out of the shadows. He was tanned with dark red hair with a little gray on the top. He had on a long, sleeveless, high-collared black cape. Under that, he had on a white shirt half buttoned up, exposing the middle of his chest and some abs like shinobi. He wore a set baggier pair of pants with a green-yellow, indiscernible floral pattern halfway up the shin. The pair was a slightly loose, plain brown one with golden buttons down the outer leg sides and a red sash around his waist to keep his shirt tucked inside. But his eyes were so strange. They had a small black dot in the center with a black ring around the center. And he had 3 scars going down his left eye. Naruto, how old are you? He moved closer, and I saw he only had 1 arm. 6. Why? He made a fist and clenched his teeth before looking to the Hokage's tower. I see. Just you wait, Hiruzen. He growled out Gigi's name, and I felt something go by me, a chill ran through me. He sighed before he unclenched his fist before he looked back at me with a smile. Well, Naruto, I think I can tell you something that will make you happy. I blinked as I looked at him. What is that? He smiled as he walked over and knelt to be level with me. My name is Shanks Uzumaki, former head elder of Uzushiogakure. I may be your grandfather and we're going to see the Hokage. Council room POV 10 minutes later. Hiruzen sat in his seat listening to the elders trying to get him to allow them access to the Namikaze fortunes. As he was about to tell them no again, a power he hadn't felt in decades filled the air. Danzo and the elders and Hiruzen himself jumped up, knowing only one man who knew the secrets of that power. Hiruzen. Hiruzen looked over at Homura as he shook with fear. Anbu. A dozen Anbu appeared in the council room and bowed to their Hokage. Lock down the village, a beast far worse than the Kyuubi is NEA. The council room door was blown in with the 4 Anbu guarding the room flying in with the doors. The Anbu crashed into the walls behind the elders, making them fall to the ground out of fear. Dust floated in the air as a figure slowly started to walk onto the wooden floor, and the walls made an echo as the figure walked in a sword sheath, tapping the ground as he walked. The new Chunin and Tokubetsu Jonin and a few Anbu in the room started falling to the floor. Long time no see, Hiruzen. I've come for answers. A man in a long black cape walked through the dust with a blonde boy being held in his one arm. He stopped in the center of the room and Hiruzen finally saw that it was a sleeping Naruto being held by the arm of the former elder of Uzushiogakure. The clan heads looked at the man, all of them seemed to shake at the sight of the man. Lord Hokage, who is this man? Sume asked as she looked up at the huge alpha of an elderly man. Shanks looked over at her and she shut her mouth as he glared at her. Sit down and be quiet before I sit you down. Sume, normally the most feral woman of Konoha, as looking like a whipped puppy. Shanks looked back at Hiruzen. The glare Shanelks leveled at Hiruzen could make a man's soul shake. I want to know what happened to my daughter Hiruzen. Where is Kushina and her husband Minato? Hiruzen turned ghostly white as he looked at the most powerful Uzumaki he'd ever known. All the clan heads looked at the man and then back at Hiruzen. Lord Hokage, what is he talking about? Danzo spoke before Hiruzen could. The Crimson Beast of Uzushiogakure, the last user of an ancient bloodline of the Uzumaki clan. Shock filled the room as they looked at Naruto as held onto the man's cape. Forget that for now, I want to know if this boy is my grandson. A vein appeared on his head as he looked at Hiruzen. And who am I going to kill for letting the villagers attack him every kami damn day? The floor around him shattered at his yell, the window blew out and the Anbu who'd surrounded him all passed out from the power he let loose. The civilian council members who were too scared to speak passed out as well. The ninja council nearly passed out from his power. Lord Shanks, I'm sorry but I can't tell you th. Hiruzen, if you don't answer my questions I'll destroy the security seal barrier around the village. And as the former elder of Uzushiogakure, I will take all the seals and scrolls my daughter brought from our homeland. Hiruzen shrank back as he looked at one of the few men he feared. She and Minato are dead, Shanks, and yes, Naruto is your grandson. But, you have to let me explain. Hiruzen tried to retake control but stopped as he looked into Shanks' eyes. I see. Well, my grandson has told me everything on the way here. He wanted to be a shinobi. As for explanation, I could care less. You will have someone to take me to my daughter's home. I know you knew my daughter was a seal master as well, it's still standing. After that and the beating you all have coming, I will start his training myself. But, Shanks looked over at Danzo, making him freeze. The old war hawk was no fool. He knew that even if he used his root and Shisui Sharingan he'd only just hold the man off. All of Konoha's ninjas knew the Sharingan was useless against a seal master. I know all about that beast, I can sense it, you old bastard. My grandson will not be made into a damn weapon or keep being a kami damn punching bag. As of this moment anyone who so much as touches him without his okay dies. Danzo sweated as he looked at the man he knew could tear the village apart if he wanted to. Oh, I also noticed something when I saw him running from them. Some of your shinobi were in the crowd. If I see that again, well, you can guess right. Everyone nodded before a dog-masked Anub appeared beside Hiruzen. Lord Hokage, a group of 40 ninjas were found dead right outside of the tower. A second later the dog-masked Anbu was slammed with the same power everyone else was. He didn't pass out but was brought to the ground. I guess that one has a bit of willpower. To withstand my weak haki is impressive. He'll do for a guide. We'll be waiting outside, and I will be coming as I have about 90% or so of the valuables from our old home. I'll be coming to exchange it for the Ryo it's worth. My grandson is done digging through trash for food and clothes. Hiruzen nodded, knowing he'd lost his chance to get a word in. Naruto's POV 2 days later. Gramps, this is incredible. I looked back at my grandfather and saw him sitting on the porch of our new house. A smile on his face. That's nice, Naruto. Don't forget we're going to get you more clothes later as well as training gear and a few swords. I'll be teaching you the Crimson Beast style of swordsmanship I use. Really, Gramps? He smiled wide and nodded as he stood up and looked over to the gate. I looked over and saw the girl I helped when she was being bullied. I heard my grandfather laugh before he spoke up. Little miss, you're free to come onto the grounds. I'm sure my grandson would love the company. She epped before slowly coming out from behind the stone gate. HHHLOLLL Lord SSJ Hank A and N Naruto K-kun. I smiled then ran up to her and grabbed her hand. Well, you heard Gramps. Let's go play. We have a small stream and pond around back we can play in. I turned and started to pull her to the small forest behind the house. N Naruto-kun. I laughed as we ran through the trees. I smiled as we came up on the small clearing with the stream feeding into the pond. I looked at the flowers around the pond with a few rabbits on the other side of the pond. This is a pretty place N Naruto-kun. I smiled and I let her hand go before I ran over to the stream and pulled my sandals off and rolled my pants legs up. I jumped into the water. I smiled, loving the cool feeling of the water. I heard some splashing behind me and I turned around and saw Hinata smiling at me. I grabbed her and pulled her up to the edge of the pond. I reached in and grabbed a few of the flat stones. N Naruto-kun WW, what are we doing? I smiled and pulled one of the smaller rocks out. I got into the stance Gramps showed me for shuriken throwing. Gramps has started teaching me to throw shuriken and said he'd teach something to help me learn faster later today. That's nice. I laughed and threw it as hard as I could. It skipped 2 times before it splashed into the pond. Hinata took a stone from my hand and then did the same as me. She got 3 skips over the water before it splashed into the pond. Shanks Pav. I laughed as I watched Naruto drag the poor red-faced girl off into the small woods behind the house. I nodded my head before I sat back down. I know you 6 are there, come on out. A second later Hiruzen and 5 more Anbu appeared at the gate. I smiled as I looked at him. Hello, Shanks. I hope you know the hell you've thrown the village into. Forcing the announcement of Naruto's heritage has split the citizen and shinobi councils. Then there is the matter that you now have the funds equal to 5 years of the budget of the village. When we add in all the money and investment accounts your daughter and son-in-law had, you now control 2/3 of the economy. I smiled as I rested my arm on my thigh. Well, certainly not what I set out to do, but nice to know. So, my guess is the shinobi don't care too much about it, as it adds another shinobi clan, though upset the power of the civilian council had, right? Hiruzen sighed and nodded before walking over and sitting down beside me. Yes, they are upset that a new powerhouse is here and it's clear they nor the elders can force you into compliance. So they are trying to convince me to have Naruto married to one of their daughters or to put in the CRA when he'd 15. I huffed and nodded my head. I would like my grandson to marry the same as me and my daughter did. But if not, I will see to it if he finds good women to marry if he wants to be in the CRA. Well, I may not like it, but it is his decision to make, but I will make it clear to him that he is to love and respect those women. Hiruzen nodded, seemingly happy with my words. Well, do you need anything? I smiled then held my hand out. I want the shadow clone jutsu. You and I both know her has the reserves for the jutsu, plus it will help me teach him our clan's jutsu, Fuinjutsu, and if he can use it, the Othaki powers. Hiruzen looked at me, worry on his face. Can you? Hiruzen, I'm the last master known to use haki. I think I know when someone has that power. But, I'm surprised you didn't notice it, Hiruzen. He can sense emotions near perfectly and seem to be, at least to sense or well aware of other presences. To think at his age he's able to do that. It's an incredible experience to see someone so young to have that level of haki without knowing anything about it. I see. Well, can I ask if he has those powers as well? I hummed as I looked back at the forest. I don't know. But, one thing I am sure is that he'll become extremely powerful, maybe more so than you and me. Smiled as I looked down at my grandson as he walked beside me with a look I loved. He had tried his old blue shorts and torn up shirt. He now wore a pair of black jeans with a shirt like mine and a blue sash around his waist. He had sandals, like mine, with a long black coat on his shoulder. Tied on his back was a fine set of twin katanas. They were larger than he was at the moment, but he'd grow into them. Hey Gramps. Yeah. Naruto stopped and then looked up at me with a worried look on his face. I know I sense them too. Don't worry if they try something, I will deal with them. He nodded before he turned around, and I looked back and saw Hinata running after a small laughing girl. Hanabi. Naruto ran off to help catch the little girl. I laughed and turned to watch them try and fail to she slipped by them and came running right towards me. I laughed as I kneeled down, setting my clay sake jug down, and grabbed the little girl as she tried to run by me. She laughed as she grabbed onto my arm. I laughed as I sat down on the street as Hinata and Naruto rushed over with a few Hyuga clan members came running up. Lady Hinata. Lady Hanabi. I laughed as Hanani grabbed onto my open shirt. She stomped her feet on the ground as she laughed up at me. I smiled down at her as she pulled on my shirt and tried to climb over my legs, and reached for my sword. I patted her little head as the two clan members approached me. Lady Hanabi. Please leave Lord Shanks alone. I laughed as I wrapped my arm around her and stood up. Naruto grabbed my sake. I needed to talk with Lord Hiashi soon anyways. The two clan members stiffed as they looked up at me. The little girl grabbed onto my collar and laughed as she kicked her legs. Do you two think he and the elder could spare the time? They sweated as they looked at me. Why yes, Lord Shanks. I laughed as Naruto grabbed the sake jug, slung it over his shoulder, and grabbed Hinata's hand. She turned red, and I laughed as we started to follow the two clan members. Hanabi seemed to be claiming down as she sat on my arm and rested her head on my shoulder as she held onto my cape collar. I looked at Naruto and Hinata out of my eyes and smiled. A new couple may be coming soon. Naruto Pav. I smiled as I walked with Hinata's hand in mine. I looked at her, and she looked away, her face all red. I stopped making her stop as well. I set the sake jug down and then put a hand on her head. Do you feel sick, Hinata-chan? Her face reddened before steam came out of her mouth and started falling over. I grabbed her and noticed my Gramps and the two clan members circling around us. Is Lady Hinata okay? I shrugged as I picked her up in my arms as best I could and grabbed the sake jug. Wow, she's real light. I nodded and started to walk again. She's a little warm, but it is hot out today. Maybe she got overheated. Gramps laughed a little, then started to walk again. We best get this lady's home then, Naruto. Oh, and if you drop here when we get home, I'm throwing you into the pond again. I gulped, not wanting to be thrown into the pond again, the water was so cold. Yes, sir. I held Hinata tighter, and she rested her head on my shoulder and grabbed a hold of my shirt. She must cling to things in her sleep. I smiled for some strange reason. I like this. I'll have to ask Gramps about this when we get to the Hyuga clan compound. Naruto. I looked up and smiled, seeing Gramps as he stopped again. Yeah, Gramps. He smiled as he looked at me. When we get them home, you be on your best behavior. This will be the first time you will be in a formal setting, so behave. I nodded as we got going again. Thankfully we weren't too far from her home. We walked up, and the two clan members quickly ran up to the guards. They spoke as we walked up to them. One quickly ran off, and we were led into the clan compound. Lord Shanks-sama, welcome to our home. I looked over and saw a woman who looked a lot like Hinata. Her hair was much longer and a slightly lighter shade. She had on a white kimono and had a sweet smile on her face. Lady Hinoka. I looked up at the other guard as he bowed to the lady. I quickly followed, doing my best to hold Hinata up as Gramps bowed to her. She laughed into her hand before she gave us a small bow back before taking Hanabi and holding her in her arms. Hinoka Haim. I looked back and saw Hiashi coming quickly with the guard. He looked at us and started to look angry as he looked right at me. I stepped back before my Gramps stepped in front of us, blocking us from him. Calm down, Lord Hiashi. Naruto is carrying her because she passed out from the heat. I guess she was training before she ran off after her sister. I watched as the ordinarily emotionless Hiashi seemed to show some fear as he looked at Gramps. I felt a little relief as Hiashi backed down some. Yes, she was, and I guess she could have overheated. But, I do wish my clan's branch members had done their jobs. I laughed as Hinata slowly started to move around. I looked down at her as Gramps talked with the Hiyashi. She moved closer to my chest, and she sighed as she pulled on my shirt some. I smiled and looked up at Hana. Hanoka-sama, do you think we could get her to a bed? She smiled and nodded as she waved for me to follow her. I did, and we walked off, leaving Gramps to deal with Hiyashi. You know, you and Hinata sure look cute like that. I felt my face heat up as we walked through the homes. Hinata was making little movements in my arms made it a little hard to keep her in my arms. My right hand is still holding the rope around the sake jug. So, you're this Naruto-kun my daughter has been talking about all this time. I'd like to say thanks for saving her from her bullies. I noticed something. She was a beautiful lady with her hair and the size of her chest, which Hanabi was making more visible. Hanabi pulled her kimono over some, and I could see her bar and some skin. I felt my face head up more, and I looked away from her. Oh, your red face is cute. I looked down at Hinata and stopped as I locked eyes with her. She turned red, and before I could say anything, she fainted again. Haha, a cute couple if I've ever seen one. By the way, we're here. I looked up and saw we were at a huge house. It was a little bigger than mine and Gramps' house, but we had a forest around ours. I followed her in and did my best to show manners like Gramps told me. You can take her to the living room. The second door on the right, and feel free to wait while I get drinks. I nodded and gave her the best bow I could. I quickly walked to the door, happy to get her weight out of my arms. No matter how light she was, my arms were burning. I walked past a few maids, and they bowed to me as I walked. One smiled at me before she opened the door for me. Welcome, young master. I blushed and bowed before standing back up. Thank you, miss. She smiled, and I walked into the living room. I walked over to the couch and tried to lay her down. She clung to my shirt and sighed, knowing her grip was really tight. I kneeled down as best I could with her weight. I dropped the jug and smiled, glad Gramps' sake was okay now. I got onto the couch and laid Hinata on the couch beside me, but half her body was still on me. Naruto-kun. I jumped, hearing her say my name before she pulled herself to my side more. She rested her head on my thigh, and I smiled again before I rested my arm over her back and held her closer. Damn Naruto, you got game already. I stiffed and slowly turned my head, seeing Gramps smiling wide with Hiyashi and Hanoka beside him. Hiyashi looked ready to rip me apart, but Hanoka smiled as she looked at me. I laughed before pulling my arm off her, hoping Gramps would stop Hiyashi again. Naruto, you know, taking a lady the first time you bring her home is so forward. Gramps laughed as I felt my face heat up again. I growled before I reached up to grab one of my swords. Hiyashi looked surprised, and Gramps laughed before he waved his hand. Okay, I had my fun. Now, let's get you free. We need to go talk with Sir Hiyashi. He and Hanoka walked over, and Hanoka pulled her hands from my shirt. Gramps wrapped his arm around my chest and picked me up, then sat me back on my feet. I nodded before Hanoka held up Gramps' sake. Thank you, Lady Hanoka. She smiled and gave us a small bow before Gramps turned, and he started to walk out of the room. He followed behind Hiyashi as he opened the door across the hall. I followed them into the room and looked around the new room. It was like we walked into a hall where another man with a woman was beside him. They looked at us, and I smiled and waved to them before I remembered to bow. When I stood back up, the man had a slight smirk, and the woman gave me a small smile and waved back. Mother, father, thank you for coming so quickly. Hiyashi bowed to his parents before taking a seat between them, and we sat down in front of them. I watched Gramps pull his sword off his side, then seat it down to his right side. I was confused. He didn't have an arm on that side, so why? I did as he did, took my swords off my back, and set them down on my left. Now, as I told you, Lord Hiyashi. Hinata has a great skill level for her age, and you're right, she does need more confidence. But, I believe I know how to help her. How so? My granddaughter is afraid to fight. Gramps nodded as he looked at them. No, it's not fear, my daughter was like her when she was young. Your daughter? The elder Hyuga asked, and I looked away from them. Gramps sighed before I felt him putting his hand on my head. You'd know her as Konoha's Red Death or the Red Hot Habanero. You mean Kushina? Yes, she was my daughter. Didn't Sir Hiyashi not explain what happened in the council meeting? Naruto-kun. I looked back and saw Hinata standing in the doorway. Shanks Pav. I smiled as I looked back at Naruto's little lady. Haha, Naruto, why don't you take your little lady and teach her the tree walking exercise I thought you? Okay, Gramps. He grabbed his swords and put them on his back again. He bowed to Hiyashi and the two elders before he turned and walked over to the door. I smiled as Naruto took her hand again. I laughed a little as her face turned red and didn't faint this time. Come on, Hinata-chan, I heard you Hyugas have really good chakra control. I'm sure you'll get this down fast. Her face got even redder, and I couldn't help but remember my wife Makino. I laughed, seeing what I knew was a future couple. Naruto pulled her away, making her follow him. Once the door closed, I turned back to look at the others. You were saying, Sir Shanks. She's not afraid, she's gentle. She doesn't want to harm anyone while training. My grandson, like all Uzumaki, has a massive reserves of chakra. He had learned to make shadow close so she can learn the gentle fist that way. I can also work on making her reserves larger, as there is a secret that makes training easier. And what is that? I smiled before I looked over to the door again. You three can come in. I know you're there. The door opened, and a little girl came running. I laughed as she jumped onto the side of my cloak. Hinoka walked in with a maid behind her. Hinoka took her seat next to Hiyashi as Hanabi tried to climb up my right side. I laughed, then patted her head, making her laugh. She grabbed a hold of my hand and I led her around using my hand. Mommy, he's had hands feel like strange. Oh, you can talk, that's good to know. She smiled before sitting down on my right knee. I laughed as she leaned back into my side. It would seem the Hyuga heiress and her sister have taken a liking to the Uzumaki clan head and heir. I nodded before I looked back at the adults. Hinoka was laughing, and Hiyashi looked at his mother with shock. I laughed before I cleared my throat before getting their attention back. Like I was saying, the secret is shadow clones. They have an ability not many know about. What is that? Hiyashi seemed very interested. This jutsu allows the user to create one or more copies of themselves. A person's chakra is evenly divided between themselves and Thor clones. Creating one clone will give it half the user's chakra, creating two will give each a third of the user's chakra, and so on. Now, as for the secret, shadow clones useful for intelligence gathering. A shadow clone can be sent into hostile territory, gather information without endangering the user, and disperse when finished, thus transferring what they've learned. But dispelling too many at once can kill the user, that way this jutsu is forbidden. What? I looked at the shocked elder and laughed a little as I grabbed the sake jug. I know, it was shocking for me when I fought the first time. He learned to counter some of my attacks by using them. And Naruto can already use this jutsu. I nodded before I held the jug out to them. The elder smiled, seeing my little gift. What kind is this? Junmai Ginjio, I figured it'd be best to bring a gift. Hiyashi and the elder smiled before Hiyashi stood up and then grabbed the jug. You even got my preferred kind. Maybe letting her spend some time with you as a chakra trainer for a time each day would be smart. She's already finished her training for the day. I have 2 questions. I looked at the elder mother and nodded before patting Hanabi's head. She stood back up and walked over to her mother. Yes, miss. What would you like to know? She smiled as she looked at me. First, how many clones can Naruto-kun make, and can you teach that jutsu to Hinata? Well, Naruto can make 100 right now thanks to the massive chakra reserves we Uzumakis have. With that, many of our clan are born with Johan levels. And as far as I'm aware, your clan isn't known for large chakra reserves. I'd have to get her levels up before she learns this jutsu. Once she gets the tree walking down, her reserves will grow slowly. How long will it take to get her to a level where she can as the shadow clones? I hummed before nodding my head. If I can get them to water walking and teach them a few jutsu, their levels will increase over the next few weeks. But I won't have Naruto teach her the shadow clone jutsu until she has a high chunin level. That sounds more than fair. Why don't you take her for the rest of the day? Okay, then should I get her dinner or should it bring her home for dinner? What were you going to make? I smiled as I stood up. I'm looking to hire a maid to start making food and help clean at home. I can still make anything, but it's a little troublesome but doable. I could help with that. I blinked as I looked at Hinoka before she clapped her hand. A moment later, 2 maids came in, but I noticed their hands were a little rough, and they had a little more muscle than the other maids. I see, so you want to send maids that can fight. They jumped, and I laughed before walking over to them. I gave them a small bow. I thank you both for the help. So how does 80,000 yen a week sound? They gasped, and I smiled as I looked at them. I have more than enough to pay that, plus we have a private hot springs and training grounds your families are free to use if you'd like. But that's more than 4 times what the main house pays us. I blinked as I looked at them. Really? In Uzushiogakure, that would be just the average pay. They smiled before they quickly bowed and rushed off, and I nodded my head before I looked back at the other. They looked shocked, and I waved before I noticed Hanabi dragging my sword across the floor. Little lady Hanabi. She jumped and looked up at me with the sweetest smile possible. I promise I was going to put it by the door. I laughed before I walked over and grabbed the sheath. Well, thanks for that, little lady. I slipped it under my sash before I patted her head. You're free to come along and watch them train if you want. Yeah. I laughed before she grabbed my hand and started to pull me along. Follow me. I smiled as I walked behind her. Yeah, just like old time. Naruto Pav 3 weeks later. I smiled as I stood upside down from my branch and smiled over at Hinata as she did the same in the tree next to mine. I looked over at the pond and saw 20 of my clones and the 5 fighting Gramps on the water. Glad to see my control and chakra level have increased so much in the last few weeks. Naruto-kun. I turned my head back and saw he had a smile on her face, but it was still red. Ya Hinata-chan. She smiled before she jumped down to the ground and then waved for me to follow her. I followed her as she walked deeper into our small forest. I smiled, seeing her new clothes on. She had changed from her well-covering black training suit to a pair of pants with a small versus cut t-shirt. She walked up to a small blanket with a basket and a large apple juice bottle. I had MYUA and Emma set us a picnic lunch. I smiled, grabbed her, and pulled her over. She laughed a little. I was happy to see she was getting a little confidence now. Shanks Pav. I smiled as I looked down at the little couple from my tree. Well, the next few years are going to be interesting. Dodged her gentle fist strike from the left, and she sent a blast of chakra into the water. I jumped back, missing a pair of clones fighting on the water with us. I landed next to the second pair we made, then rushed Hinata with my 2 wooden swords. I dashed through the 2 sets of clones as Hinata charged through the as well. I channeled my chakra into the wood as she got close. I swung the wooden swords hard, sending 2 chakra blades down at her. Soru. Hinata vanished, dodging the attack. She appeared beside me, and I knew what was coming. Hush so Ken wave. Soru. I jumped some move to dodge the attack, but I couldn't hold a candle with Hinata's control over Soru. I got a good 20 feet away before the shockwave opened the pond. Our clones kept fighting as the wave went under them. I sighed as the pond settled before Gramps called out. Okay, you 2, that's enough for today. Emma called out to us, and we dispelled our clones and walked off the water. So Hinata-chan, How do you think the clan meeting is going? Who knows, Naruto-kun? But, now that we're 8, we're going to the academy soon. So, how did the council take it when your grandpa cashed in the other half of your clan's riches? I looked at her as she smirked. Oh, they lost it. Now we have enough money to live off of for over a decade. Danzo and the elders all but trying to kill him. But, we don't have to worry about that. We need to get our spare clothes and head over to the hot springs and get cleaned up. Right, Naruto-kun. We walked over to the porch, and I was glad to see our clothes with some cut apples. We sat down, and Hinata sat beside me and leaned into my side. She rested her head on my shoulder and sighed as she started to eat a piece of apple. I smiled, then wrapped my arm around her. For some reason, Gramps just laughed off. I saw Myu and Emma looking at us from over their shoulders. You two seemed like you're having fun. We jumped as Gramps walked out from around the house with a bag over his shoulder. Hey Gramps, what is with the bag? I thought I'd get you two gift as my way of showing you how proud of you two I am. To master all these skills before you were 10. Gramps walked over and kneeled in front of us. He opened the back, and we smiled, seeing the 2 wrapped bags from the clothes store that went looking in. I smiled as I ripped mine open and saw the knee-length orange cloak with our clan symbol on the back. At the bottom was a set of 3 black lines. I smiled as I took my black cloak off and put my new cloak on. Oh Cammy. I jumped as I looked at Hinata as she had an orange jack that looked like my cloak. But on the back of her jack was my clan's symbol with a smaller Hoiga clan symbol below our symbol. Hinata smiled, then hugged the jacket and looked at me. We match. I nodded and smiled as she quickly put the jacket on and smiled as she got up and ran around with it on. I smiled as I watched her as she ran around. Naruto. I blinked, then looked up at Gramps as he watched her run around. Yeah, Gramps. He looked down at me and smiled before sighing. I have to leave the village for a little while. The Hokage asked me to go and get an old friend Tsunade-chan, the best medic the village ever had. I shouldn't be gone for no more than a week at most. I nodded, glad that Gramps was finally taking an active role in the village. Old friend, do you know her? Haha, well let's just say that me and her have a past. But, this time I don't think this time I'll get punched but her because I got drunk. I looked at my Gramps as his cheeks turned red as he rubbed the back of his head. I hummed as I looked at him, then nodded my head as I stood up. Whatever Gramps, just don't be stupid again. Oh, I stopped knowing that. Oh well. I took off at a run, knowing what was coming for me. Get back here you Bart. Ignoring his yell, I ran over the water, not wanting to get thrown again. Soru. Gramps appeared before me and screamed as he raised a hockey-covered fist. I let myself fall into the water and kicked off the water hard with my chakra. I rocketed out of the other side of the pond and quickly used my chakra to dry my clothes as I jumped